Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this last panel of the day. I'm going to read a prepared note that some smart people helped put together for me, and then I'm going to go into the panel. So since 2022, I've had the honor of serving as the chair of the Army Science Board, working with more than 75 experts to explore a wide spectrum of innovation and technology that's available to the United States Army and to the United States. And as you would expect, that covers the range from C5ISR to logistics and sustainment and other technologies, and in particular, disruptive technologies. We've looked at weapons and weapons research and medical science, all areas that we provide information back to decision makers and senior Army leaders throughout the year. And we draw our experts from the military, from other parts of the government, academia, and private industry. And many of us have had experience in other organizations. In my case, once I left the United States Army, I went out into industry and have been doing that for the last 7 or 8 years. And all of that experience from not just me, but from the members of the board, we're able to bring that back to the Army. So, on behalf of the Army Science Board, again, thank you for joining us for this General Officer panel. I wanted to take just a second and tell you, I'm not going to take up a lot of time doing introductions today. What I'd really like to do is kind of break up the session this way. I'll have each of the panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about the focus for their particular organization and their priorities. I'll ask a series of questions, and then I'll stop. We do have folks strategically positioned around the room. They'll have cards like this. If you have questions for the panel members, just pass those to the folks who will be walking around. They'll get them into me, and we'll spend the last part of the session addressing any questions that you may have. So let's talk about the topic for today. As you know, there's a lot of momentum towards taking advantage of the technologies associated with modeling, with simulation, with artificial intelligence in order to support decision-making, logistics, training, interaction with coalition partners, and a myriad of other capabilities that those technologies provide. We're very fortunate today to have 3 talented experts in their areas to join us today to have a discussion about how do we employ, how do we identify the requirements, how do we procure, and then how do we field these capabilities. I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion. What I've asked the team to do is to have fun with this, to share, because the people in the audience are the ones that are going to build the capabilities for our soldiers and for our warfighters. So with that, I'm going to talk to you. Let me first introduce General Gaydon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pat Gaydon. I command Army Test and Evaluation Command, and I'll just briefly do an introduction and talk about what the command does first, and then talk about some focus areas for model and sim. So our mission statement really has 4 parts. We do test and evaluation for the Army. We're direct support to Army Futures Command, meaning that they set our priorities. We inform Army senior leader decisions. We do that unemotionally, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But like any mission statement, the purpose is the key part. And we always tie the purpose back to our Army soldiers. So we're part of a machine that's modernizing the Army, a small cog, but an important cog. And the purpose is to help make sure the Army provides our soldiers the capabilities that they need to fight and win our nation's wars. We bring that back to across the workforce so that they understand that and they see themselves in the mission statement. ATEC is unique. I know this is inter-service. That's the first word, and ITSEC. across all the 5 services, we're unique that the test and evaluation enterprise, the whole enterprise is consolidated under one command, where we're not breaking developmental test and operational test up. So what do we do? And I'll tie this to model and sim here as I do this. We do the developmental test. So think technical test before soldiers touch a piece of equipment or a system. And so model and sim, optimally those capabilities of the model and sim would be delivered when a prototype comes. So back at Aberdeen Proving Grounds right now, the autonomous transport vehicle is doing thousands of miles on our tracks there, but at the same time, we have a model and sim for that vehicle that we're learning safety issues, throwing things at it that we just couldn't do in a live environment as many times as we can do in model and sim. We do operational testing, and I think everyone understands that's when a piece of equipment matures, that's soldiers out in the field with that piece of equipment, and we have statutory requirements to do that. And the operational testing, often it's very large, expensive tests. So model and sim would allow us to maybe just use a platoon, and then the rest of the unit up to a brigade size could be constructive. And we've linked our test centers, and I'll talk about them real quick here in a second before I get the hook. But we've linked our test centers so that we have the capability to do that. We do live fire test and evaluation. So for the M10 Booker, it's one of the newest prototypes that we're testing. We destroy a number of M10 Bookers. It's very, very costly. Wouldn't it be nice if we had accurate models and sims that we didn't have? I'm not saying we get rid of live fire testing, but it was really interesting a couple weeks ago when I saw that live fire where we predicted how high the vehicle would jump off the ground, how much something would bend, and we were very, very close based on models and sims. That should allow us to do fewer live fire testing. And then we do the evaluation for the Army, bringing all of that together to write the reports that inform Army senior leader decisions. ATEC is spread across the Army. We have test centers at Aberdeen, White Sands, Yuma, Dugway, the electronic proving ground in Arizona. We have environmental proving grounds in Panama and Alaska as well. 1/3 of the Army's land mass are these treasures that we call the proving grounds. And 3 out of our 4 largest installations are those test centers at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, Yuma in Arizona, 1 and 2, and then number 4 being Dugway in Arizona. NTC's in between. And I look forward to the interaction. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you, General Beeler.
Hey, Chris Beeler. I am the Program Executive Officer for Simulation Training and Instrumentation here in Orlando, and I look out and see all of my Team Orlando colleagues out amongst the audience, so I know I'm in good hands. For those of you who don't know what PEO STRI does, we are one of 12 program executive offices under the Acquisition Authority with the Army Acquisition Executive. We are the one that is focused on developing Army training capabilities at the collective, sometimes individual, but mostly collective, all the way from squad through corps, theater, and in some cases, as we work with other partners, beyond that. Some of the things that I'm focused on very much is one of the number one priorities in the Army is to develop the synthetic training environment. And why? Just for all the reasons you talked about, sir. It is much less expensive to do critical thinking and training and experimentation in a virtual or constructive environment, partnered with the live environment, so that you really get to see the cross discussion, the collaboration, the ability to think outside the box and then understand what the repercussions of an individual's decision actions are in an unbiased way, right? So a lot of training we do today, we white card, and then there's an argument over were you killed or weren't you killed out in the simulation or out in the CTCs. And so we want to make sure we've got a strong, true to form, true to the weapon platform, true to the threat platform representation, so that we don't have those things, and our leaders can then honestly use exquisite capabilities that they wouldn't be able to train with. Think of multi-domain operations, think of space effects. You know, it's unlikely we're going to get the Air Force to come out all the time. I mean, certainly we do some joint stuff, but be able to use those things in conjunction with thinking through a hard problem set, whether it's, you know, a near peer or something completely unexpected. Being able to do that, I think, is absolutely critical to our ability to maintain decision cycle space ahead of our competitors, as it were. So the synthetic training environment is one of the chief's priorities, and we're getting after that. But on top of all of that, you know, I'm the PEO for our CTCs. I'm the PEO for a lot of home station training capability. I'm the PEO for ATEC in terms of developing threat capabilities. We do cyber. We do, you know, we do the OPFOR. So the value of having all of those pieces together is I can see, and my team, my leaders really can see, where there are opportunities to bring in some kit that is already developed in the model, in the modeling world or in the simulation world. And as we pull that together, we will be able to deliver a better product for less money, because we're going to not repay for the same code we've already bought once. And we're going to work through that. We just stood up last year our enterprise transformation program lead, and they're really looking at developing a sandbox where we take our code and we own our code and we keep our code. And as we do agile development, we're able to port what we've verified, validated, and accredited back into the authoritative data source. And so those are the areas I'm very much focused on, is making sure we deliver all of that, and working with all of my partners here at ITSEC and certainly across the test community. Thanks, sir.
Thanks, General Baylor. General Wilson.
Sir, Jeremy Wilson, Director of CACT. For those of you who are not familiar with CACT, there's a few directorates within CACT that some of you might be familiar with. CTCD, our CTC program, that's 5 CTC programs. Okay, that's 5. So it's NTC, JRTC, JMRC, JPMRC, and USERPAC, and the Warfighter Program, MCTP. All right, so the CTCD, the National Simulation Center, there at Fort Leavenworth. Several TPOs, TPOC, again, that synthetic training environment piece that we manage very closely. TPO Live, which is part of ATSC out at Fort Eustis. The TPO Live team obviously has to do with your ranges, strats, et cetera. Why do I mention, and then last but not least, CALL, Center for Army Lessons Learned. Why? Because those lessons observed, in fact, right now we're executing an observation right now with SAG-U downrange, and we're going to capture those lessons observed like we do at the CTCs, and we're going to integrate it back into our requirements. The OE continues to change, and so that's one of the ways we get after it, along with many others. But I say that because we're focused on building and sustaining readiness across the training enterprise, really from the small unit collective all the way through the theater army, for both current capability and emerging capability. Why do I bring up emerging capability? Because right now, as we get into some of the initiatives that we have ongoing, working closely with my partners and teammates up here and others in the audience, it's important that we understand what those requirements are and that they're included. All right, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Some of our priorities right now, obviously the synthetic training environment. Again, looking at a lot of those requirements that we're bringing online, how we're going to divest them so that there are no training gaps in the operating force. How do we continue to build out our CTC program, not only replicating near-peer threat, but making sure that we have the right capability that's coming online for a lot of those transformation and contact units, and we can replicate that in the environment. And then at the Theater, Army, ASCC, and Corps level, when we start talking about warfighter exercises. And so again, across the live, virtual, constructive, we're interested in all things, and so that's all I got, sir. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot. So I had an opportunity this morning to walk around and see some of the floor and some of the things that people were demonstrating. So my first question goes to you, General Wilson. So when you look at the advances in AI and what's coming with quantum computing, machine learning that's out there, could you talk a little bit about how you see the impact on training and how that's going to affect both the operating force and the generating force?
Yes, sir. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think when you look at the time involved with developing a scenario right now, with all the manual inputs, you look at that being reduced significantly. And when you talk about the level of complexity of the exercises, it's gone up exponentially over time. Just in the last 5 to 10 years, it'll become important to have that capability. And so what would take weeks to build out will not take weeks any longer. When you start talking about building the terrain, the friendly forces, the enemy forces, and all the other complexities associated with it, I think there's some opportunity. I also think there's opportunity in assessment, and with assessment as it relates to providing AARs, that feedback that we owe those forces throughout the exercises. I think there's some opportunity there, and I think it'll add another level of realism, quite frankly, longer term, sir.
General Beeler, I'm going to ask you the same question. You see the technology, a lot of folks come in to show your PMs. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so, he talked about complexity, and I think there's no doubt that as we start layering different models, different simulations on top of each other, running in the same space, that takes, a lot of computing power, 2, a lot of store and compute capability. Where do you put all the data? How do you get to the data? All of those things require a technical solution to make sure that all of that stuff is seamless. I think quantum computing, we've been talking about it for a long time. It's still in its very much developmental stage. But when we can get to that, it's going to be able to do that a lot faster. It's going to be able to help us shorten the flash to bang on that computing time, and maybe even the amount of space that it takes to do that kind of data management and analytics. And then that just goes back to speeding up all of the things that General Wilson wants us to absolutely make sure that we get to. I think another area is haptics, right? So, that's the tactile thing. I was up at APG about a year ago, and I got to drive the HET that goes around the track outside, but you're sitting inside a little mill van, and you've got a gas pedal and a steering wheel and a clutch and a stick shift, and I don't know, they don't do stick shifts anymore, do they? That was when we learned how to drive. What was that, a deuce and a half? Oh, I'm sorry. At any rate, the problem with it, obviously I crashed it. Fortunately, there's a driver inside the actual vehicle, so it doesn't hit anything. But there's no tactile. I learned how to drive in a car, on a road, on gravel, on dirt, all of those things. And today's soldier, the private, the sergeant, they learned how to drive in a video game simulation in their living room. And it didn't have that tactileness. But we got to make sure that as we think about training and developing tools, that we have all of those components together, not just what the younger soldier is capable of doing, but really making sure that we stimulate the environment more than just a steering wheel and a shifter or a clutch, right? We got to have that feeling, and we've done a lot of that in terms of our medical training. So one of the products in our portfolio is the Mystic Trainer, and that's what helps our combat medics get certified in how to deal with an actual casualty-related environment. And it's got mannequins that bleed and talk to you, and the system provides all of that adrenaline rush that really stimulates the soldier in more than just the cerebral way. it gets to emotion, and all of those things, I think, we got to be able to take advantage of that and stress the environment so that we are the worst thing a soldier or a commander faces is in training. And I think we're going to be able to get there, but to get there affordably, I think that's going to be the space that we're going to have to maneuver in, sir.
You talked a little bit about, destructive testing. Same question goes to you, but kind of a little different environment. Your thoughts?
Yes, sir. So, I mean, if you take the word training and turn it to test, what's AI's impact on test? A couple thoughts, and I'll start by saying, Chris, the vehicle she was driving is the same one I talked about, the model and sim that we have, where yes, we have human drivers, but at the same time, we've got it in a model and sim, throwing all kinds of things at it. So the AI's impact on tests, and it's two parts. How do we use AI to augment test, I think, is one question. And then how do we test systems with embedded AI? That's probably a harder question, and I'm not going to present definitive answers, but applying AI towards test in ATEC, we've done AI challenges the last couple of years. So think all those SAPI plates that we all wore in combat, and every so often they have to be x-rayed, and you got to see if there's defects in them. We did an AI challenge, put it out there to the community, and they came back with solutions where AI could determine which ones had flaws or needed to be replaced at a very high rate. That was the most recent one. The one before that, we put a challenge out for munitions that produce submunitions. We were very challenged to figure out exactly where every submunition went, but using acoustic data and applying AI algorithms to that, teams were able to do that, to not take humans out, but for really tasks that are hard for humans to do or take a long time, the AI is enabled. So every year we will have an AI challenge like that. And then, how do we test systems that have embedded AI? A much harder problem. I think they're, depending on whether it's aided target recognition, whether it's large language models, there's different frameworks for that. And quite honestly, we're still working through that with the team that we have at ATEC, and also looking at industry best practices on it.
So you bring up a bunch of points, and I'm going to kind of throw a curveball now based on that. And I think I'm going to go to General Biller and General Wilson. So how can simulations prepare warfighters for scenarios, and here's the twist, involving autonomous systems and AI for decision making? I told you we were going to make this interesting.
I'll take it. So from a development perspective first. By making sure that the threat has all of the same ability to reach into AI capabilities, making sure that our threats are representative, not only in tests, but in training. I think that that's going to then drive how we look at developing AI for BLUFOR, right? And so everything we approach, I get to approach it from, is this a BLUFOR thing that I'm doing, or is this a RED4 thing that I'm doing? And how do we make sure that we keep parity in that space? And so he's going to work through my CFT partner sitting over here, Colonel West, and they're going to set priorities, and then we're going to figure out how to use the technology that's available, working with our ATEC partners, because they're literally with us in every step under the agile development process. I mean, we're kicking out product every month from a spiral to an agile process. We've got sprints every month, and every quarter we're going to end up delivering content to the National Simulation Center that General Wilson owns. And so I think through that partnership, we're really going to be able to drive what's happening in the space, and then that builds trust, right? So the challenge we all have with machines is we generally don't trust them. If you make it look like a dog, however, everybody thinks it's really cute, and if you kick it, everybody goes, you kicked the dog. No, it's a robot, it's okay. But I was talking to some scholarship students last night at the dinner, and that's kind of what they're studying is human-machine interaction and how do we do that. And I think we're gonna learn a lot from those folks, and then we're gonna figure out how do we build trust in a machine that we aren't inherently interested in trusting. I remember a lot of Gulf War challenges we had, missile systems, recognition, friend, foe, green, all of those spaces. And I think, where's the limit that we want AI to be able to go? And then where do we absolutely think the human needs to be the final overriding decision? And I think that space will likely to change as we learn to potentially trust an automated system more.
So, General Wilson, I have to come to you, right? Because you mentioned earlier, lessons observed, lessons learned. So, same question. Your thoughts.
Right. I think anytime we're talking about whether it's an autonomous system or new training capability, the first thing I look at is how are we training it in the live virtual constructive. And the reason why that's important is because when you look at certain emerging capability, the opportunity to training it in the live and to get the sets and reps that you would want in the live don't exist. But it does exist in the virtual and constructive, right? And so I think being able to replicate that, like General Beeler was talking about, in the virtual and constructive provides the means to not only sustain the readiness that you build in the institutional or in the generating force, but you can continue to sustain it in the operating force. But you got to be able to replicate that in simulation, and it's got to have the right parametric data, right, that you can do it. But I'll tell you, as we look, over the next IV line and what those requirements are with the CFTC team and working with PEO Stride, those are some of the things we're considering right now. So we're not late to need from a training resource standpoint.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's always live virtual constructive. We're always looking to leverage what's already in existence and to build off that and then identify those things we're going to need in the next 5 to 10 years.
Did you have
I'd like to maybe give a perspective, not using my test hat at all, but I just came from the Joint Staff J7, responsible for joint concepts, and had worked there for the last 2 years. So how can models and sims help the warfighter? And from a joint perspective, I think we could go back 100 years and there were map boards and large war games, and between World War I and World War II, the Navy figured out that carrier warfare, and when you got 100 aircraft in the skies, it made a huge impact, and that was in 1921. And the Army has done similar things with Louisiana maneuvers and different things like that, where we're experimenting to adopt or adjust to the changing character of war. And now we're 80 years since the last large-scale war that the world has seen, and I think we've got to really rely on model and sim, in concept development, and in the Joint Staff, we were trying to do this to validate what was good or what was not good in the joint warfighting concept with a little bit of a future look, but there's a lot of assumptions on what the capabilities are that you play, what year do you play, how do you bring it in, and then bringing it back, maybe taking the future capabilities away to current capabilities. It's TTP development, and I think we do that well as an Army and working through the sims that we have, but maybe more of a joint flavor to some of those things.
So, since I get to throw curveballs from over here on the far right, I'm going to also go back to you, General Wilson, and ask you the same question. But really the slant here is, and maybe a little unfair since there are 3 Army generals sitting up here, but I guess my question is if you look at all the coalition warfare that's occurring, if you look at the National Defense Strategy and our identification of partners, tell me about if there are barriers for using these simulations, using modeling with our international and coalition partners.
Yeah, yes, sir. I appreciate the question. I think it, for us as we're looking at it, and we see it all the time in the MCTP program, is really interoperability. But when we talk interoperability, we talk joint force, and then we talk combined, our allies and partners. Just anecdotally, as an example, 5 to 10 years ago, there was probably only one coalition exercise, right, where coalition partners participated. Now, that is no longer the exception. That has been normalized over time, and it's multiple exercises. Yamasakura 87 is ongoing right now. MCTP-4 deployed 4 time zones, over 13 locations, multiple countries. And I bring all that up to tell you that we have figured out the bridging strategy, but it's not enduring. And where we're going with Next Gen Constructive, and I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder here, is to make sure that that's baked in, to make sure that that interoperability piece exists, that we no longer have to build out as many cross-domain solutions as we've had to do in the past. But we've had some great success, or we talked earlier, we've had great success in Europe, and most recently with Austere Challenge. We've had some great success in Indo-PACOM as well, and we continue to build off that.
General Beeler, you've got folks who are out procuring and building. Same question. How do you deal with the notion of interoperability? Not just jointness, but also international and coalition.
Yeah, it's what I would say is we have similar challenges joint as we do with our international partners. One, giving me access to the data or the ability to understand the effects of something so I can build it into the machine. Thinking about, a unified data reference architecture and making sure that other systems, other models, we've got the ability to either integrate or they have hooks in them to integrate into the foundational software that will drive our models and sims into the future through live, whether it's live, virtual, or synthetic. I think there's, again, there's a trust issue, right? People think I'm going to break their stuff, and so they don't want to give it to me, or I'm going to use it wrong, so they don't want to give it to me. People don't like other people grading their homework, and so whether it's international or another service, right? If I give you my code, you're going to tell me, it needs to be better or something. And so I think those are a lot of the barriers that we really have to overcome. And time and continued work in that space, I think, is the collaboration and communication, really being open, right? We intend to say, here's how you get into TMT TSS. You want to bring your tool to my industry colleagues out there? We want you to come and bring it. We'll test it. We'll see how it interacts. Does it replicate what we're looking to replicate? And if it does and it meets the best of breed, we'll buy it. We'll put it in and we'll deploy it. But that's going to take a lot of time. And the other thing is we're unfortunately very US-centric, right? And obviously all of our stuff is the best and nobody else's stuff is really good, but that's just not true. But if we can make sure we've got the right agreements in place. I mean, I sell a lot of stuff through my foreign military sales from the training perspective. It shouldn't be hard for us to potentially either buy the integration or share in the integration work that we're doing. And we're doing a lot of that with AUKUS. So if you think about the persistent cyber training environment, the Australians came in very early on that cyber training program, and we have collectively developed a product at both the unclassified. In fact, it's running commercial on a commercial network, and then the classified versions of it, and we continue to build out from there. But I think that's a good model of how we can kind of go forward, sir.
Good. So I'm going to admit something to you now. So I think I wrote this question after I had an old fashioned, and I was thinking about my days as a PM, and it's for you, General Gate. So testing seems to be a huge opportunity to leverage modeling and simulation. Can you describe some of the initiatives being employed to reduce cost, time, and improve the quality associated with testing?
Yes. So maybe I start with kind of the life cycle from an idea to a capability. So, we would define that as what is the gap, and TRADOC and Army Futures Command identify a gap, and then someone writes a requirement, and then it goes into this stage where a program office develops a capability, and then it comes into developmental test, operational test, and a capability. If that all goes well, a capability comes out the other end, and it, depending on what the program is, and I won't call them out, but some could be 20 years. And our chief has made very clear with Transformation in Contact that that's not fast enough, that we need a much more of a sense of urgency, and we've got to move quicker. So how do we speed up? And I'll get back to model and sim. Everything I described is sequential, and if we think about problems sequentially, it's going to take a long time to solve them. We've got to be, comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable, and maybe breaking some glass on what policies or regulations say, and start layering these things. This is what our senior leaders have asked us to do. So during a PEO's development, we're doing developmental tests, or we're taking industry data. As long as we can authenticate the data, we don't need to test. We can accept that data and use it in our conclusions. And we've got lots of examples with air and missile defense systems out at White Sands right now, where we're doing developmental tests of the integrated fires protection capability and the lower tier air and missile defense system, Patriot radar replacement, at the same time that we're doing operational tests. And it drives our risk up, but we're doing it because there's a sense of urgency. And the model and sim is key on that, because those missile flight tests are multi-million-dollar tests. And I don't need a perfect model and sim when I get the prototype. 50% is probably good enough, and we've got to work with the PEOs to get that into the RFPs they issue to industry, so that's delivered. And then we do an expensive missile flight test, collect the data. Industry makes the model more accurate, so maybe now it represents actual physics 75% of the way. And then we iterate that way to drive down the amount of live testing we need to do. Our stretch goal is that we want to drive live testing down by 1/3 in the next 3 years, based on model and sim delivery that comes in to get after the urgency that the chief is after. Two more things that I'd like to talk, or maybe one. So establishing a requirement for test and evaluation is something that we've done at ATEC, and moved it through the AROC process and got it approved. So a capability development document and this is where we're working with Chris and the training community on this, has really 3 pillars to it. The future operating environment, and making it an MDO environment where we sit in general officer steering committees quarterly to make sure we're on track on that future operating environment, delivering the emitters or the SIMs and STIMs to systems. The next pillar is test, monitor, and control. You know, our ability to do what they do at NTC from the Star Wars building for a test event, so that we're turning emitters on and off, seeing what red's doing, controlling blue. Chris and her team are delivering all of that. And wouldn't it be nice if something developed for test could then become training that Jeremy used? There's an Air Force case study on this with their joint synthetic environment for F-35, where that's exactly what happened. It may not make sense in every case, but if you develop the right model and sim up front, the trainers can use it when it comes out the other end. The last pillar in that abbreviated CDD is data-driven decision. So capturing all the data at our test centers horizontally so that we're moving it quickly across these large areas and then up into our ATEC data mesh, because the evaluators that write the reports aren't the testers on the ground. And often, past history, it would take months for hard drives to make it back to the evaluators. We ought to be able to do that today much faster, and we've built the bones of it already. But model and sim, is key to all of that.
Thank you. General Biller, General Wilson, any thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. And the partnership we have with ATEC on our software development and hardware iterations has been absolutely phenomenal. They've been there from the get-go on the reconfigurable virtual collective trainer that we've been developing for General Wilson, and to deliver really out to soldiers, really squad leaders, company commanders, to be able to do that collective training at home station. Whether it was the hardware, we got the great feedback in conjunction with a soldier touch point. So we schedule the soldier touch points out. ATEC's there, DOT&E is there if it's my STE Live programs, because I have DOT oversight in that. We've got actual users. I get representatives out of CACT. I have representatives from the CFT. I mean, we're all seeing the same thing at the same time, because while I'll get test reports from ATEC and they will validate what they saw based on the development or this demonstration that was done, really at the end of the day, I'm looking to the CAC community to do what's described as verification, validation, and accreditation. And it's that accreditation piece that then enables a commander in the training space to use that device for the intended purposes and to get credit for it. So right now, we've got the RVCT ground out in a variety of spaces, and CACT has been great because they've really put it into RIFMIS, which is the training, training aid. You can go and sign it out and schedule it. And that's enabled people to see that it exists and then go use it. And then we said, or he said, you can use it for convoy training. Go forth and do this for convoy training. We're not quite there yet on some of the other capabilities, but as we continue to iterate, and I think as we go to our operational demonstration coming up this spring, we're going to be able to say, commanders, you can use this to do the following things. It has limitations. Here are the limitations. Those are absolutely things in the bucket of requirements as we go through the agile development process on the software. The hardware's pretty well set now, and so again, we will continue to iterate in that space. And having both everybody focused on the agile process is, one, it reduces time, and two, we actually get user feedback pretty directly from folks who are going to actually use it. And then that enables leaders to go, oh, it doesn't deliver, everything, but a company commander's never been able to do some of the tasks that they're supposed to do in a collective training environment that they can now do. And then once we add the air component, we're going to actually be able to do collective air and ground training at a tactical level that hasn't been done before. And it won't be perfect, but we'll continue to iterate on it. And soon will be the Apple iPhone 16, I'm sure. And we'll push a button and it'll light up and glow and everybody will be happy about it. But I think that's really the key to delivering capability quicker. And that's really the whole point of transforming contact. The chief said, hey, if there's some utility to the capability and a soldier, it enables a soldier or a leader to do something faster, better, get it out there. If it's, we certainly don't want to deploy something that's unsafe or that delivers a bad training, or a negative training impact, but we absolutely want to get it into the hands faster.
So, General Wilson, let me ask you a question along those lines. So if you think about this transformation in contact, and you think about modeling and simulation in general, so how do we translate the things that you're learning into requirements that manifest themselves in both the budget, right, and then direction, right, programs to go and build those capabilities? Any thoughts on how we take that complexity but not turn it into a 20-year program?
I mean, it gets back to what Chris was just talking about. I think as we look at existing capability, as we look at the agile development process, we're learning new things every time we get a set and rep on this equipment. And so we're able to evolve real time. And so instead of going through a lengthy developmental process and then a lengthy test process, we're leveraging COE integration. And so RVCT Ground is at a COE, and so you have that level of expertise, not just in the current fight, but they're watching the future fight as well. And they're providing those inputs to make sure that that trainer is doing what we need it to do to train the future force. And it's an iterative process. And so it's not one of those things where we wait. This is done monthly. And so these soldier touch points are done quarterly right now. On or about quarterly with MCOE, and then we'll go out to the operating force. But we're able to provide that feedback back to Chris and her team rapidly. And it's not just from those soldier touch points. It's the iterative process with folks like Fort Cavazos who have it on the ground there, soldier touch points. They're delivering equipment. They're providing feedback. We have the soldier touch points where a little more formal, where we have experts from across the COE to take a look at that capability and provide the feedback. And then obviously, General Gaten and his team for the accreditation events to really help us see in time and space.
I'd actually like to add that, when we look at the cross-functional teams and looking at the different acquisition pathways that Congress has given us authorities to use, that has also enabled us to actually execute the requirements development process in an agile way. So if you think about, the RVCT, there's a hardware component, and that's running on a hardware major capability pathway, but we're running it through middle tier. The software that runs all of these things is running through the software pathway. And so we're able to use an ICD to manage the agile development process for that as well. And so those authorities have enabled us to adapt and really enabled Army Futures Command to work with the joint community to make sure that our joint requirements are written broadly enough that each service can bring the kit that they need for their service requirement, but to the joint fight, and then still give us the flexibility to pivot and adapt quickly to what we're seeing out on the floor here today, for example. And so I think there's really an important part of what's enabled us to go faster as well.
No, that's really helpful. Here's what I'd like to do. I see our team walking around. I just want to remind you, I'm going to stop asking questions. I've got 2 quick questions I want to ask you, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So, again, had a chance to walk around, so I'm going to ask you a little bit of a different question. Talent. I'd like to get your thoughts on. So how do we recruit? How do we develop? How do we retain the talent necessary for program management, for requirements, for testing? When you start to talk about modeling, simulation, artificial intelligence, all of those capabilities, General Gaten, thoughts on talent?
Yeah, it's as important as anything we do. Within my command, we've got a campaign plan that leads us to the future. In my opening comments, I talked about the now with the mission statement, but there's 5 lines of effort in there, and I won't go through all of them, but it's people, number one, it's the process and the capabilities. And I've been in command for 5 months now, and just looking at the model and sim capability, the AI talent that we have, we did something a couple years ago, my predecessor, and it was brilliant, is took advantage of the Army Futures Command's data-driven leader program up at Carnegie Mellon and brought a cohort of testers there. And so it wasn't a mixed group from across the Army, it was a bunch of testers. And as they were learning every day, they were deciding how they were going to apply that to what they were doing, and brought that back, and started to build some of that talent. We were lucky enough to get one of the AI Scholar graduates out of that course. As you know, the military that come out, that do the year or 2 year, stay there and work utilization for the Army, but the civilian, we were lucky enough to get a civilian out that's working at Redstone Test Center, who was our lead for, AI, how do we test systems with embedded AI. We don't have a lot of depth on the chart, and for the people, it's highly, highly competitive. And that individual, after working for a good 10 years for us, ended up departing, and we're very thankful for everything he did, but how do you compete with what they can get on the outside? And my answer would be, we have to offer training and education, but the one thing that we offer is purpose. Back to the purpose statement of the mission I talked to you about, making sure our soldiers never go into a fair fight, that they've got the capabilities to win, fight and win our nation's wars. That's how we compete for the talent.
No, thank you. General Bill.
Yeah, so absolutely everything that General Gaydon said. But the other thing we do really well is we actually give real problems to solve and missions to do to our junior folks. I mean, you might end up in a corporate world, you might end up in a small business, and certainly in a small business, everybody's going to be doing everything. I get that. But we can pair the training, the development process, the mission with actual, I was a platoon leader, right? I had like 90 people in my first platoon at 21. I got APMs coming out of, college. I've got interns that we're bringing right in from, whether they're in my logistics community or they're in my contracting community or my engineers. They come in and they solve real world, real Army problems that matter, because they know that ultimately there's probably a soldier's life at the end of that mission set. And so we can't compete with industry. I'm not sure, we'd be able to afford it in the first place, but we absolutely can compete on delivering something for our nation, and something that they can actually sink their teeth in and do. They can see the results of their efforts inside an organization.
Yeah. I want to come back to something you said. General Wilson, thoughts?
Yes, sir. I think, much like General Gaydon and General Beeler, I think, when we look internal to the organization now, we're looking at, do I have the right talent? As the OE continues to change, as the training environment continues to change, do we have the right talent? Are we changing with it? I use MCTP as the example. As we are building out next-gen constructive, as these exercises continue to become more complex, we have gone back to take a look at the organization to make sure that we have the right capability and capacity to provide the feedback that we are chartered to provide. And if not, then we've got to make some changes. And so we're in the process of doing that. But I go back to the purpose piece. The talent that I need in the organization, I will not be able to compete with the private sector. But from a purpose standpoint, and their contribution to the force, from a readiness standpoint, I think that's what we're
those are important points. And General Biller, you said something to me right before the start of this and said there's a number of people in the audience who were either with PEO STRI, left and went to industry, and now have come back. And I think that's a wonderful model, because they get a lot of experience and come back. And I'd like to see that apply in other parts of the Army also, as people can come and go.
I think from an acquisition corps perspective, I've seen that over the 23 years I've been doing acquisitions. And to be fair, right, when they leave the organization, they are absolutely still likely contributing back to the defense. Yeah. That once you get that bug, it's really hard to cut ties and go do something else. And then often you want to come back. And so I think making sure that we we remain open to that idea, I think is important. But there's, people will criticize and say that, well, the contractor you just hired, now you got a guy who worked over there. And so we have to be cognizant of that, but it shouldn't be a barrier to us bringing on the best talent that wants to be a part of the team.
Right.
And I think there are ways to get around, to work those issues, but it's been very valuable to the organization, and I think to our industry partners as well.
Good. So I want to do something because, we've only got about 15, 20 minutes left. We've got some great questions that came in, but I also want to give you time for a closing comment. What I'd like to do is maybe throw a couple of these out for you to consider, and then we'll just go kind of down the line and whatever comments you have for the takeaway comments. So the first question I have is, as you discuss and implement C2 Fix, agile contracting, agile acquisition, et cetera, what role does agile funding play, and where is the U.S. Army in discussion with Congress about agile funding? I figured you'd like that one, so. Anyone?
A couple of things, right? So Congress has acknowledged in some areas that it's very challenging in this space from a funding perspective to do like software, for example. But we discovered internal to our own selves that we were the ones, the Army was deciding that you had to spend O&M dollars on software sustainment. And in the last year and a half, we've really reversed that, and we've said there is no such thing as sustainment for software. There is only continued development, and so software has moved completely, for the most part, into RDT&E, which is 2-year money, which then gives us a little more flexibility over that period of time, and actually enables us, as we look at the development process, to not have the valleys of non-funding as we go forward, because we can cross years, and then we're inevitably going to have a CR, and so that extra year gives us a lot more flexibility. And then we still have 5 years in terms of development side of the house to actually expend the dollars once they're on a contract. So if we're doing a lot of development work, there's still quite a bit of flexibility in that.
Okay. I was going to make this a jump ball, but I'm going to start with you on this question. I thought this was interesting. So the question is, we always talk about positive things when it comes to AI and simulation. What about negative things?
Yeah, so I mean, that's I think what my organization is supposed to figure out. So one of the thresholds we have to meet, not just for the Army, but at the DoD level, because we have overseers at DOT&E, is test adequacy and thinking through some of those negative things that could come out of AI. Something you can't necessarily understand how it got to where it got to. It's better if we get citations with it, and I know some of that's possible, but not all of it is. So it's how many iterations do you need till you know that it's safe enough for soldiers? The 5 things we looked at are effective, suitable, survivable, and that comes into all of those. Test adequacy, thoroughness, and I think I said it before, I'm not going to give any of the answers on how to test AI. We'll keep looking at industry best practices, depending on whether it's a LLM, aided target recognition, whatever it is. There's probably a different framework for how we would have to go about testing each of those parts of AI.
Thank you. General Wilson, you and I talked a little bit about this next question, so I'm really interested in your response. The question is, are we going to see universal standards for this industry?
I'm sorry, sir, say it again, universal standard?
Yes. Are we going to see a universal standard for this industry?
I think we're working towards a standard, and I think it's important. We talked that a little bit this morning as we work towards a common operating picture from a simulation standpoint. We see it across the board at the tactical and the operational level with simple things like building out the MPE and setting conditions for future warfighter exercises. There's not a set standard for that. It continues to evolve, so I think by establishing a standard, it'll not only facilitate the development of simulations and scenarios, but it'll allow us to operate off the same common operating picture as it relates to simulation. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And it's also important, to understand what we have to bring to the Joint Force and what those requirements are. It can no longer be pick your own adventure. We don't have the physical environment to do that. And so when we're looking to gain some efficiencies out there, that's one of the ways we're going to get after that.
So this next question, there's lots of great conversation about desired technologies, apps, and devices. However, there's very little discussion of the future network over which these things must operate and rely. Who is leading the network and architecture development?
I think from the Army's perspective, I mean, we used to have the network CFT. It's renamed the Command and Control CFT, and the efforts on, and this is certainly not in my lane, but I'm on the periphery of this because eventually we're going to have to test what's out there with Command and Control Fix and Next Generation C2. So Army Futures Command Headquarters and the C2 CFT are the requirement developer with a whole lot of help from other people. I think that answers the who, and I don't know that I'd be speculating to go further.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also, there's an operational network, and then there's likely to be a test community network, perhaps, and a training community. And if one of the things I've been talking about is I don't want to, as a PEO, spend a lot of money developing a network if I can write off of somebody else's network. Because if he's got 70% of my requirements already in him connecting all of the proving grounds and the test ranges together, what's the same thing I've got to do anyway to support the testing community? Why can't that just be expanded to the training community at some point in time? It's unlikely that we will be able to operate on the operational network. I'm a logistician. I have never been able to operate on the operational network. I'm constantly thrown off. Fine, I got it. I got the secondhand radio and the old weapons. But being used to that, right? I think we have to, from a realistic perspective right now, I think that there's going to be separate activities, but as long as we meet the CIO and the CDO's requirements for the data structure, for the transportability requirements, for how we set the conditions with the data and how we move the data back and forth, I think eventually we'll see that come together, but I think it will require massive amounts of computing power to actually power that, and I'm not sure we're there yet.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But I am going to write a note about having a separate panel to talk about how you were treated as a logistician.
Thank you.
Hey,
Go
sir,
ordnance.
I just want to say there was an A&L net and lower TI.
Hey, one of the reasons I was really excited about this panel is that we had the lead for training, we had the lead for testing, and we had the lead for acquisition for modeling and simulation. And so with the time that's left, here's my ask, about 3 minutes each. You've got known industry leaders, you've got suppliers, you have government leads. If I turn the floor over to you, what is it that you want to tell them? What is it that you want them to focus on, to know that you're thinking about all the time? General, I'll start with you.
Okay, I was looking at my notes to see what I wanted to make sure I talked about that I didn't. And there's not much left. I think partnership number one, and I already talked about it, but there's nothing like beating a drum to make your point. But the delivery of the prototype is important as we're delivering combat systems, but the models that go with it just as important. And I talked about missile flight tests and those sorts of things that are tens of millions of dollars. And we will never be able to replicate a barrage of missiles coming at us, and whether or not our systems can defeat that barrage of missiles in a live environment. It would be hundreds of millions of dollars to do those actual tests, but we have to test it, and you can't do it without the model and sim. So as a prototype is being delivered, we ATEC will work with the program offices, and we have one represented here, but there's lots of them, to get that written into the initial contract. And then I think it becomes a win-win with industry. You know, everyone wants to get to the next milestone, and if we can get the test adequacy and write the reports that help you get there, because the model and sim was there and we could prove it does what it's supposed to do, I think that's a very good thing on both sides. And I get it. It's, you know, the shiny object or the prototype gets delivered and it's on display, but just as important is the model and sim that goes with it. And what does that do for us? You know, it reduces, some tests are unaffordable, and we can't do it without that. But the things that our soldiers get asked to do, a lot of things, the op tempo is very high. If we can make it a smaller test and still get to the same conclusion because of the model and sim, I think that's helpful. And I think the last thing I would say is I will take any data that you have as you do your own testing, and you know, maybe I give one example. The infantry squad vehicle, GM Defense, so one of the contractors, you know, they were able to model and sim the vehicle, but also look at the terrain that we had out at Yuma on the test track, and see how the vehicle would perform on that test track. And then if we were able to get that data, maybe we don't even have to use the test track. But that's one that we're working on, or less miles, less costly, those things. But we're very interested to work with the industry that's here. Thank you.
General Biller, I know you talk with this community a lot, but any final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thoughts come back to, you know, modular open systems architecture that I can plug in to the unified data reference architecture that the Army is putting out, right? That will enable me to choose the best of breed and to swap out and be agile as we continue to move and we add real capability on the battlefield. The models that you want to come for test, I absolutely want to be ported into the training environment as well, because it's really it's two sides of the same coin, and that enables me to not pay twice. Because for us to do this, we're going to have to figure out how to do it without breaking the bank, because it can't become unaffordable. If it becomes unaffordable, they can't do all the things that they need to do, and once it comes out of the EEPEG, it ends up in the TTPEG, and they have a different set of challenges as they manage training across the entire part of the Army.
Yeah. Thank you. General Wilson, I'm going to leave you with the last word, and to General Beeler's point. So it all comes together where you have trained soldiers, units, organizations. Your final thoughts?
You know, just to dovetail off what General Beeler was just saying, you know, I'm always looking for opportunities to train existing and emerging capabilities in the virtual and constructive. We cannot afford to be late to need. And so we're not focused on the now. We're looking deep. You know, just looking out in the crowd, and General Beeler mentioned him earlier, the CFT team helps us do that. And they're a critical part of what we do up here But if I can leave you with one thing, it's, hey, what are those opportunities that exist out there to train emerging capabilities in the virtual and constructive as we onboard that so we're not late to need in the operating force?
Thank you. And thank you for your engagement and your participation, and please join me in thanking the panel.